Okay, everybody. Well, this one should be really short. You can hopefully see the length of the video, but we're just going to be doing Baroque art in Spain. This is the continuation of the same PowerPoint that covers Baroque art in Italy, but we didn't, well, we got through the art in Italy and we did not get through or start the art in Spain, but this shouldn't be too long. Okay. And, we're going to be keeping the same idea. Essentially, we're just going to Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. And this one is good to know, of course. This is Francisco de Zeberan's Saint Serapion. So we're keeping it pretty consistent with depictions of holy figures, including saints. He does have some stuff in common with Bernini, of course, with the tenebrism, that stark contrast of light and dark. You can, the figure stands out an incredible amount compared to the background. But we get a very sense of dramatic light and dark. We do get these beautiful folds in the drapery that are also contrasted, especially here where it's a bit darker. But the mood is kind of a quiet intensity and certainly of piety. It's supposed to invoke wonder and reverence. Again, that idea of spiritual experience through looking at art. This was actually hung in a funerary chapel of a monastery. So death was probably on the mind of most of the people there. And it says over here, Saint Serapion was murdered by pirates in 1240. There are actually a number of hypotheses about how he was actually murdered. This is probably definitely the most interesting one. He was on a mission essentially in North Africa, and he was murdered by pirates. But yeah, but that was during the Middle Ages, so it's been a few hundred years at this point. But he's kind of represented like a Christ figure here. We kind of identify with his strength more than his suffering. Although he's dead, it's certainly like an idea of peace, not really of suffering necessarily. So, but definitely giving us this purity pictorially, but also spiritually. So, and he's kind of like a Christ figure in the sense that he's like hanging up. He's not necessarily crucified, but his arms are tied up and stuff. So, but we definitely get the naturalism. The composition's pretty balanced, kind of up in our face again, but the signature and the label of Saint Serapion is right here. This is Trompe l'oeil. It's not actually. It's actually part of the canvas, of course, but it's just made to look like it's attached. And then one of the most famous works from the Baroque era in Spain, we get Juan Sanchez Cotan, the Quince, or Quince. I just always heard it. I always pronounce it quince, even, or quince. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, but cabbage, melon, and cucumber. And this is in the San Diego Museum of Art. It's kind of a big piece there. But this is at the point when Spain is at the height of its political and economic powers, considered the golden age of Spain. So they have a lot of colonies, mostly in the Americas, some in the Pacific portions, and then they have a tiny little colony in Africa eventually, but they're a very strong power overseas, but as well as in Europe, of course. And they definitely have this bond with Italy through Catholicism, not so much with France, even though they're Catholic as well. But they are even stricter than the Italians. I mean, we do get inquisitions in Italy. Think of Veronese in the late Renaissance having to go through the Inquisition for naming his painting The Last Supper and filling it with heathens and whatnot. But the Spanish Inquisition's notorious for being incredibly strict. So, and at this point, Spain actually controls part of Europe. They, besides Spain, of course, they control the Netherlands. The Netherlands are under the thumb of Spain, and they learn the still life painting from the Dutch. They kind of borrow it from the Dutch, and they try to imitate it with the sense of supernaturalism. Kind of make it their own style, though. But we get this very stark, clear order, kind of this Caravaggio-esque light. But we have a very effective shadow. It almost makes it seem mystical. But the guy himself was actually a Carthusian monk, so he liked the idea of simplicity. He lived a very simple life. But we get the sense of space, especially as the cucumber at the end here juts out, and it enters our space, and we get this longer shadow for it. But at the same time, these are kind of relevant for the 17th century. All of these works were actually introduced in the New World for cultivation by Europeans. So perhaps alluding, however obliquely, to empire and conversion. So, but definitely this asymmetrical balance going. And a bit unnatural in some regard. Lots of times with still lifes, especially we'll see up north, is that they it looks like just a table, like a banquet. They call them banquet pieces half the time, but just a table that's been set for a nice meal or feast or whatever, and they just paint it. But in this case, this is obviously staged by hanging the quince and the cabbage on a string. And so that's not natural. You don't do that if you're going to eat it necessarily. You can keep food like that, I guess, from spoiling, but we don't normally just tie it to a single one to a string. We might have it in a basket up there or something. But yeah, so a bit different and pretty simple, but definitely heavy on the naturalism. I think perhaps best exemplified through these leaves of the cabbage, which are quite detailed. But yep, and very Baroque with the contrast, especially with the blank, very dark background. And this is like around the same time we get Caravaggio working as well. Here's what a student did. Edible deliciousness. Here's another one. Very awesome. And there it is in the order of the composition. But those are like two figures. This guy is the main one, though. This guy is super important as far as Baroque art in Spain goes, and he will be pretty influential for a while. He's definitely one of the biggest names in art history, Diego Velázquez. So this is Juan de Pareja, and this one's actually in the Met. It's in New York City. And he is one of the court painters to Philip IV of Spain, and he was kind of his favorite, the favorite of the king. He was famed as a portrait painter, and the guy he paints here is actually his assistant and his servant. So you can actually see the tear in his sleeve down here. He's poor. He's not wealthy. Some people think he's wealthy just because of the style of the dress, but that's just the style of the dress for the time. But seeing that he's wearing torn clothing, he's definitely not wealthy. But he is definitely displayed with the sense of dignity. And so Velázquez obviously seemed to have a sense, some respect for his assistant here. But yeah, but he's kind of known for his loose brushwork. He's a big fan of Titian, especially Titian's later work with that loose stroke, and that he is often known for portrait paintings as well. Velázquez is a big admirer of Titian. And we do get a pretty subdued palette here, but it also kind of helps imbue the subject with vitality that's almost palpable. So, and even like at the time, obviously I think it's a bit silly, but at the time, one of his contemporaries noted that the portrait was so striking in its similitude. When it was sent to some friends for their criticism, he said they stood looking at it in awe, and as well as the actual Pareja in awe, and not knowing to whom they should speak or who would answer them. So, but you can definitely see the looseness of the brushwork, but at the same time, there's definitely a sense of naturalism, very softness of the edge, and each brushstroke's not necessarily blended, but at the same time, it's very lifelike. You can see the reflections from like the oils in his skin and stuff like that. So it almost makes it feel more lifelike than perfectly blended brushstrokes in a way. But yeah, it looks good certainly. This one is from the Northern Renaissance. You should have already seen that. But this is just an idea of that type brushstroke. It's a portrait. Like we should be able to recognize who it is, but it's very controlled brushstroke, very hard edged, and the brushstrokes are not visible. But it doesn't necessarily look as natural in many regards. So although this is still a lovely painting, of course. So. Oh, and here's that story for you real quick. And it says, to tell the truth, I do not like Raphael at all. It is in Venice that the finest things are to be found. It is Titian who carries the day. So this is actually Velázquez. So he saw works by Titian. King Philip IV actually had some in his collection. He had some works by Titian, and he loved the loose brushwork. Raphael was the one that was really famous for his portraitures and everything, and he used all that type brushwork as well. I mean, Leonardo kind of did it as well in many regards, but Titian becomes that famous portraitist after Raphael dies, and he is known for having that looser brushwork and well, that's really what Velasquez likes. That's not dies. That's what Velasquez likes, and that's what he imitates. That's what he puts in his own work. So, and you can see it here. It's just an example. This is the detail of Titian's Rape of Europa. Okay, but this is probably Velasquez's most famous painting, at least this this day and age. This is quite famous. It's called The Maids of Honor or Las Meninas. Both are equally well-used names. But it's kind of a group portrait, which we see more so in the North. It's kind of that subject matter that we see in the North. But it's also a genre scene. Like, it's kind of just everyday stuff. Now, the people are kind of posed, perhaps, more so than you would actually see in everyday. But that's kind of besides the point in regards to but he is definitely still a colorist like Titian. The brushwork is pretty loose. You can see it when you look up closer. I'll show you a detail in a moment. But it still looks really naturalistic. It looks really good. So, and we definitely are very good at our natural human gestures and expressions. So this is kind of just supposed to be an ordinary moment in the artist's studio. So we have all these paintings in the back, and we're in the artist's studio. But we do definitely get these different levels of illusion as well as portraiture. So the main focus here is the little princess, and she's kind of the center of attention. She's the lightest figure as well. But it's interesting because this is Diego Velázquez here on the left as well. This is the artist, and so this is a portrait of him. And then we are viewing from the perspective of the king and queen, Philip IV and Maria Anna. And so you can see them, or see ourselves essentially in the perspective in the mirror. So we are viewing this as a mother and father viewing their daughter, and then her maids who are helping her, and then some of the, like this dwarf and this child and dog and whatnot for entertainment and whatnot. So definitely different levels of illusion, definitely very different. There's this give and take, kind of leads your eyes around the canvas. We definitely have artists that implement themselves into paintings before, but it's like he's looking at the king and queen to paint them, because he's looking at them. But at the same time, perhaps we don't really know what's on this canvas, so perhaps it is the painting we're seeing here. So definitely unique in that regard. So, and the princess, I don't think I said her name's Margarita. So, but there's definitely this claim of the nobility of the artist. So they used to be kind of looked down upon, or at least kind of seen as handicraftsmen again. But we are using our hands to create masterpieces like this, and in the presence of a princess and a king and a queen, right? He's quite high in society, so he's elevating himself as well as the profession of painting. So, but there is that emphasis on light. It's perhaps not as stark here as in other Baroque era pieces, but we still have the loose brushwork. You can see how loose it is. And it didn't look like it was this loose when you see it from a distance, right? But this is very loose. Look at her sleeves. You can see the distinct brushstrokes. So quite ingenious in many regards. But it is likely that it was influenced by the Arnolfini wedding portrait, because at the time actually it did hang up in King Philip's palace, and so Velázquez would have been quite familiar with it. So he's probably looking at stuff like this as well. Okay, but here's a rendition of it. A couple of these. This one. This one's actually Picasso's Las Meninas. So, and he's a Spanish artist, even though he works mostly in France. It's definitely a very influential piece of work, and you know, it's a good thing to notice. Many artists are often looking at artists from the past and responding to them. So that's how it goes, and Picasso is looking specifically at Velázquez here. So we'll get to that quite a bit later. But that's actually all of the Spanish art, and now we're just going to do the little bit of unknown practice, which will be Baroque art in Italy and Spain that we covered in this little chapter. But it's going to be, we're going to look for a Caravaggio, a Gentileschi, a Bernini, and then Zurbarán as well as a Velázquez. So this one. So this is another Judith and her maidservant. It should be, so I put Caravaggio in here, right? And we know that Caravaggio and Gentileschi both did these scenes. But as far as you should be able to remember what their figures look like. They look much more capable in Gentileschi's depictions, and this is what we get here. Especially the maid who's holding the basket with the head in it is not as old as she is in Caravaggio's. So a bit more naturalism, as well as the palette's a bit richer here. Look how, well, it's kind of subdued here, I guess, but it's pretty bright and lovely. And look at the attention to detail, especially in like the hilt of this sword and whatnot. But this is Gentileschi's, another Judith and her maidservant. So here's this one. We get a nice memento mori. His figure is perhaps, it should be recognizable, but it's not necessarily the way we've always seen him depicted, because he's wearing a hood. But this is St. Francis in Meditation, and he's pretty popular in Italy, what we've looked at throughout the semester. But this is in Spain. This is Zurbarán's. So he often did these large-scale religious images, and think of his Saint Serapion, which is the one figure in the foreground, and you're pretty much not really noticing anything else because there's pretty much nothing else to notice, and we get the same thing here. So, and these were usually in pretty great demand for churches and monasteries throughout Spain and even the Americas, where we're getting these like Spanish churches and influence there. There's missions they have over there. So, but it usually has these restrained colors, simple, very simple compositions, but definitely combined with a precise detail and strong theatrical lighting, kind of give these sacred figures an intense mystical presence. So they're quite nice though. Okay, I believe he was the only sculptor, we had on that list, so that you should hopefully know this is Bernini, and this is Apollo and Daphne. Bernini actually did this when he was 17 years old, which is embarrassing for me, I guess, but you know, it's pretty good. And he said, actually, so Bernini, in many regards, he's a sculptor, right? But he tried to emulate the effects of painting, and that was how he really got his works to have this marvelous sense of softness. So he would often like push the materials to their limits, like transform, marble into hair, flesh, like leaves and twigs. So Bernini obviously is very good. He's definitely the peak sculptor during the Baroque period. So, but this is also kind of a quintessential Baroque subject that depicts both the transformation. So the nymph here, Daphne, is metamorphosizing into a tree to avoid advances of the Greek god Apollo. So kind of a dramatic moment as he's catching her. She's gonna start turning into a tree. That's why you see her hair going up as it like turns into leaves and stuff. So pretty interesting. It's interesting mythological story. But okay. I think this is pretty similar to the aesthetic we've seen of his other stuff, especially as it kind of comes into our space, and we get a pretty bleak background again. Most of the figures are just here in the foreground. Stark lighting, especially look how dark it is on the top left and how light it is on the bottom left. But also this sense of naturalism, how the people seem like contemporaries, but they seem like real people. Look how dirty the heel is and the bottom of the feet is for this guy at the bottom left. You can see it there. But this is Caravaggio. It says the crucifixion of St. Peter. St. Peter's famous for when he was crucified in Rome. He didn't think he was worthy to be killed the same way his Savior was killed, so he was crucified upside down per his request. So this one perhaps isn't as obvious, but it is the last one on our list, so hopefully that helps. This is Diego Velázquez, The Surrender of Breda. This is when the Spaniards conquer the Dutch here on the left, and it's almost like, giving the keys over to Peter. Like, he's got this thing that he's giving to the Spaniard who seems so humble and graceful and clean, and everyone here on the left is dirty and disheveled, and everyone on the right is like, so handsome, pretty much, because they won. And it's almost like him getting the keys, or they're allowed to live essentially just because of the grace of this guy on the right. But like Christ giving Peter the keys essentially. But it's pretty interesting. This is just the surrender of when the Dutch soldiers surrendered. So there's that. There's also this one. I forgot this one was added in here, but this is Diego Velázquez, The Spinners. This one's actually really interesting. You don't really need to know this one. You look at this more if you take the Baroque Art class specifically. We got a nice cool cat down here. But this is supposed to be it's a story from ancient Greece. So it's, well, I guess it was technically originally written down by Ovid, who's Roman, but it's Arachne in Athena. So Arachne is here on the right. She is weaving this great tapestry in a competition with the goddess Athena over here, who's kind of disguised. But and she will end up, Arachne will make this beautiful, awesome tapestry that is pretty much about the hubris and the pride and all the mistakes the gods have made, and Athena will pretty much be saying how awesome the gods are, and Arachne kicks her butt, but then she turns her into a spider essentially, and she ends up like, well, she tries to hang herself because of Athena's humiliation of her, and she is not allowed to, and she gets stuck to be a spider forever. So it's pretty much like, don't go against the gods even if they're idiots. That's pretty much the story. But yeah, Athena looks a little worried here. She's talking to the servant over here. She's gonna get her butt handed to her. But you can definitely see like this performance going on in the background. And if you recognize the tapestry back here, this is the Titian's The Rape of Europa. So definitely Velasquez again was a huge fan of Titian. So we have one of his paintings back there within our own painting. But yeah, so that's just the story. It's like a mythological story depicted as just kind of like this genre scene, this everyday thing, contemporary thing, which we kind of saw Caravaggio do, right, to a degree, mostly with biblical stuff. But yeah, and these are the works to know, though. So there's a good amount. There aren't that many. There are only 4 Spanish ones that you need to know. So not too many. Shouldn't be too bad. There's only 10 Italian. But yeah. So here you go. Again, of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or whatnot. So, but I will see you guys next time.